Hello, everybody, and welcome into a special edition here of the Voice of College Football on the SEC channel. Please hit that like button. Please subscribe down below. I am going to be going through some power rankings. We are a third of the way through the season. I know that hurts to hear, but it does go by quickly. And we had a couple important games, so I think it is important to jump into some power rankings here. And my number one team in the country did change. Last week we talked about Texas being the number one team in the country. I think Tennessee deserves more respect than they've been getting. So I'm going to put them at number one right now for number one team in the SEC. Coming off a big win at Oklahoma, they had to prove to me that they could beat some top flight competition after beating up on Chattanooga, Kent State, and honestly, an NC State team that has been highly disappointing. They go into Norman, first SEC game for Oklahoma, and welcome them rudely to the SEC, beating them 25-15. It is a big win for Tennessee. It proves to me on especially the defensive side of the ball that they can hang with the big boys. I don't think Oklahoma's great on offense, but guess what? They dominated that football game on both sides of the ball. So I have Tennessee as my number one team in the country. Number two, as you can see behind me, I am a Texas fan if you are new here. I have the Texas Longhorns 4-0, dominant, covering the spread in each and every game so far this year. They go on the road to Ann Arbor and lay a whooping on Michigan, who ends up being a pretty good football team. I said after that game that I still think Michigan is somewhere between 15 to 22nd best team in the country, and I think Michigan proved that on Saturday versus USC. And Texas went in there and took care of business. That game was not in doubt after the first quarter. Texas was going to win that football game. So I had Texas as the number two team in the SEC. We have our first SEC game this weekend versus Mississippi State. We are favored by, I believe, 38 points. So we should win that game, and we should win it rather handily. Do we cover the spread? You will have to tune in tonight. I go live tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern time, so join me on the Texas channel for that. But number two, I have the Texas Longhorns. We have also been dominant on both sides of the ball and through all games. And in my opinion, it kind of drops off after. I think you debate Texas and Tennessee for the number one spot. But number three, I do have Georgia. They struggled in that Kentucky game mightily. I worry about them with their offense and their explosive playmakers and explosive play making capability because they haven't shown that to me. In the Clemson game, it was kind of slow until they hit halftime and then came out in the third quarter and killed Clemson in the second half. But it wasn't great. And then it also wasn't great in the Kentucky game. You only scored, 13 points? It's 13-12. So you got to prove more to me on the offensive side of the ball, and they have a pretty big test with Alabama this week. I will say this, Alabama's secondary isn't great. So if they don't get pressure, Georgia could carve them up, and that still wouldn't prove much to me. I think Georgia will have to prove themselves down in Austin a little bit more, just as Texas will still have to prove themselves in that game as well. And honestly, Ole Miss at this point probably has a better secondary than Alabama. And speaking of Alabama, Georgia and Alabama play each other. They are my fourth team. Alabama still has to prove to me, like I said, that back end has to be able to hold up in the SEC. I will say this, though. This is a down year for quarterbacks across the country. I would say it's an up year in the SEC, so that may hurt them in the SEC play. But when they get out of it, and if they are able to make the playoffs and they go against other conferences, they should be pretty good because I don't think USC is making the playoffs with Miller. And Miller Moss is probably the best quarterback in the Big Ten. In the ACC, Cade Klubnik does not scare me. I don't think he's going to be able to put up enough points versus an Alabama secondary. But in the SEC, it does. And it's going to be interesting if they're not able to get pressure this weekend versus Carson Beck. He could do some things downfield that will really hurt them and exploit that secondary. It'll be interesting if they're able to fix that secondary during the bye week a little bit or tweak it a little bit to help them back there. But overall, once they found the right offensive line combination, the offenses look better. Jalen Milroe has progressed really well. They need to realize that Jamarion Miller is their best running back instead of Justice Hayes. Once they realize that, this offense might be the best in the country. It might be the best in the country. So right now I have Alabama at 4, and they can jump up. Obviously, if they dominate Georgia, I may push them up to 2 or 1. If they win barely, I'll probably put them up to number 2 or 3. Number 5, I have Ole Miss. I think it drops off after this again. I need to see Lane Kiffin win a big game. Lane Kiffin has yet to win a big game at Ole Miss. His biggest win is a bowl game versus Penn State, who had a lot of opt-outs on that game. I do not really care about that game. I want to see him win a big regular season game, and I want to see the defense be tested. Do I think they have more talent than they ever have on the defensive side of the ball with Walter Nolan and Princely and all those guys on that side of the ball? Absolutely, I do. but I need to see it. I may think that, but I have not seen it with my eyes yet. They will be proven. They have a couple hard games. LSU, I don't think, is a great football team overall, but they're a decent offense. We'll see what they do versus that offense on defense. We'll see what happens when they play Georgia down there in Oxford. And there's a couple other hard games that will exploit them on that schedule. So for right now, I have Ole Miss at 5. I think this team right here at 5 has the most variability. I think they could fall all the way down to 8 or 9. I think they could jump up to number 1. I really believe that. So we'll have to see what Lane Kiffin does with this team going forward. But right now, I have Ole Miss at number 5. Number 6, I have Missouri. And this is where it gets really hard for me. 6 through, honestly, like 10, they're interchangeable. They really are. Missouri struggled mightily with a I'm not going to say bad. They're slightly below average Vanderbilt team. Not good. They went to overtime with them. And then that is coming off Boston College, who I think is a solid team. I think Boston College is a legit 8-4 type team, probably like the 30th, 35th best team in the country. I think they're ranked at that time. They shouldn't have been. They got a big win at Florida State, and and they were overranked because of that. But Missouri gave way too many passing yards in that game to me to Thomas Castellanos. Is he a good runner? Yes. Is he a great thrower? No. And he gave up over 300 passing yards to him. So again, this is another defensive question for me. And on the offensive side of the ball, they need to force feed Luther Burden more. Luther Burden is the best wide receiver in the country. He should be given the ball at least 10 times a game. However you get that to him does not matter. You just got to get the ball in his hands because he's an explosive playmaker. Last week, I don't know if it changed. Theo Weiss was the leading wide receiver. I like Theo Weiss, but Theo Weiss is not Luther Burden. They really, really need to force feed Luther Burden the football. And I think that will help their offense. The 2 running backs that came in Noel and Carroll, have done a pretty good job replacing Cody Schrader. But then I think people overrated Brady Cook going into the season. And I think that's why there's such a national narrative now of like, oh, Missouri's not that good. I've had them about this spot or lower coming into the season. I think Brady Cook's a good, solid quarterback, but he's nothing special. And that's why everything that I've seen just proves this ranking even more. They're number 6, and they could free fall, honestly, guys. They could fall all the way down to 10 or 11. Number 7, I have LSU. And again, it just gets hard after this. There's a clear fall off after the top 5 teams. LSU honestly kind of struggled for a whole half versus UCLA, and I think UCLA is probably the worst team in the Big Ten. If not, it's the second worst team. Northwestern has an argument for that case, or a case for that argument. And I don't know whether this is going to be fixed this year, and I don't know whether it's going to be fixed going forward. I made a video last night about how I think Brian Kelly's not the long-term solution at LSU, and if he goes anything less than 9-3 this year, I really think there's going to be calls for his job, calls for him to be fired, and they're going to have to find a new coach because we've talked about LSU before. Anyone can seem to win a national championship there. That's really the only program you can look at and say anyone. You can put anyone in that position that can win a national championship. You had Les Miles, who's not a very good coach, win a national championship. You had Ed Orgeron win a national championship. I don't think he's a very good coach. He's a great recruiter, but he's not a good head football coach. If Brian Kelly cannot at least get to a national championship game, or hell, in the Final Four of the college football playoff, those are the expectations at LSU. He should be let go. And this defense is slightly better than last year because it was in the hundreds last year. I think it's probably in the 90s to 100s again at the end of the year, would be my projection. But it's not going to make this big leap like LSU fans wanted to. So if they're not going to be patient with Brian Kelly, and he's already not a cultural fit, in my opinion, I would just get rid of him right now. Not right now, but at the end of the season, and cut bait while you can. Right now I have them at number 7. The offensive line that was supposed to be very good has looked iffy at times. The defense still isn't much better than it was last year. And then the offense has taken a step back. Who would have thought? You lose 2 first-round wide receivers and you lose a top 5 pick at quarterback. Man, who would have thought that you take a step back on offense? Everyone else other than LSU fans did. So we told you so, LSU fans. Number 8, Oklahoma. Oklahoma, basically where I had them. I had a logjam in the SEC for my previews. I think I had 5 or 6 teams going 8-4. Oklahoma is one of those teams. They are who I thought they were. They're a good, solid football team, probably about the 30th best team in the country. There's nothing special about this team other than probably their linebackers with Danny Stutzman and Jared Kanik back there. But everyone else, and Kip Lewis and those guys, but everyone else isn't that good. Their secondary's okay. It was overrated coming into the season. I've watched them enough. They're giving over 9 yards up per attempt in the passing game. Their front 4 in the running game's good, but it's not great. It's okay at getting after the quarterback. It's not great. Their offensive line is terrible. Their quarterback position is bad at this point, and they don't have a running game. Jackson Arnold was the leading rusher coming into this game versus Tennessee, and you saw how that worked out. Their leading rusher at halftime was their wide receiver, Deion Burks. There's nothing this team does even good. They're okay, but they're not good anywhere. And I told Oklahoma fans this wasn't going to be the season you thought it was going to be. This is going to be a 7-5, 8-4 season and a building block season. And the worst part is you kicked out a quarterback in Dylan Gabriel, who I think is overrated. I don't love him, but he's better than what you've had so far. And now you're going to probably have to ride with Michael Hawkins, a freshman, the rest of the season. So I think they made bad coaching mistakes with that. I think this team was overrated, and it usually is. People need to stop listening to local media because they overrate your teams. I heard so many Oklahoma local radio people and local people that cover the team overrate this football team. Listen to people who are outside of the program who don't get paid to publish what they publish. And maybe you would have set your expectations to reality, because your expectations were playoff. That's crazy to me. It was never going to be that. They're an 8-4 team at best. Arkansas is number 9, and Arkansas, I was completely wrong on. This is the first team where I was just dead wrong. I thought they were going to have a very bad year, win 3 games. I think I had them winning. They're already 3-1. They should be 4-0. They should have won that Oklahoma State game. I'm very impressed with Taylor Green. I thought he was going to be abysmal. He hasn't. He's had some moments where he's looked bad, but for the most part, he's been pretty good. Jaquindon Jackson, I love going into the season. I thought he was your best player. Has looked damn good, averaging over 8 yards per carry. The defense still isn't great, but it's good enough with the offense of Bobby Petrino leading the way. They have a big game this weekend versus A&M, rivalry game in Jerry World. It's going to be a fun game. I'm excited to talk about on the SEC show at 8 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday with Tyler. So please go check that out as well. And we might as well jump in at number 10 because I have A&M at number 10. So A&M Arkansas play this week. Obviously, the winner, if A&M wins, they'll jump up probably couple spots. If Arkansas wins, they'll probably jump up a couple of spots. So overall, I think it's going to be a really fun game. It's going to be interesting who the quarterback for A&M is. I think it has to be Marcel Reed at this point. With all the injuries Connor Wegman has sustained and the way he has looked, I think you got to go with the younger guy, the more mobile guy behind a questionable offensive line. And with questionable playmakers and wide receivers, you don't have great wide receivers. So in my opinion, lean into the running game with Marcel Reed because you do have good tailbacks and Amari Daniels and Le'Veon Moss. So I would lean in the running game and put in Marcel Reed and try to run around a little bit more. And that's what Colin Klein wants to do anyways. I saw him do it at Kansas State for years as a player and then as a coach. He wants to do that. So A&M just lean into it. Number 11, a team that I had going 7-5. So again, not surprised. South Carolina, 3-1, last win versus Akron. Good, solid football team. They could be 4-0 if Lenora Sellers doesn't get hurt versus LSU. I think the expectations for Shane Beamer have been unfair. I think South Carolina fans, again, some of the times fans put up unrealistic expectations for these coaches. And I think the expectation for South Carolina should be your first year with the new recruiting class, you should probably be 6-6, 7-5. Second year, again, 6-6, 7-5. Next year, 8-4. And then that fourth year, if you can keep everyone kind of like they're doing this year, you should be able to win 8 or 9 games. And I think this team honestly could probably win 8 games this year, which would be a really good season with that schedule. I had you at 7-5 over exceeding Vegas expectations, which I believe were 6.5 or 5.5. So in my opinion, if you go 7-5, 8-4, that's a good season for South Carolina in the new SEC. I would embrace what you are, which is a lower middle team or middle team. And then some years you can get up to the top of that middle. You're never going to be in the top 4 or 5, in my opinion. I think you can probably get up to 6 is the highest you'll ever get. So I think you should embrace that. There's nothing wrong with that. You have to know your ceiling as a football program. And I think the ceiling for South Carolina is that. Number 12, Vanderbilt. Again, I was wrong on them. I think I only had them winning 2 games. They're already 2-2. They could easily be 3-1. They're a good, solid football team. Diego Pavia and then Jerry Kill on the staff have made worlds of difference there. Also, C.J. Taylor on the defensive side of the ball is a very good player. He hasn't played as well this year as last year, but he's a good player. So I have Vanderbilt at number 12. And then you could debate a couple of these spots, guys. Until we get to 15 and 16, I'm very confident in that. 12 through 14, again, is another debate. I have Kentucky. They've been just inconsistent. You get killed by South Carolina. You look really good versus Georgia. You look pretty good versus Ohio, and then you looked okay in the first week as well. Like, it's just been all over the place, and that's kind of what Mark Stoops' teams are. I think that's why this team is destined to finish 6-6 or 7-5 this year. I tried to push them up to 8-4 in the preseason. I'm going to be wrong about that. But Kentucky 2-2. It's going to be an interesting game this week. Or sorry, they don't have a game this week. They are on a bye. Let's see who they end up going, or let's see if Brock Vandergriff can improve just a little bit throwing the football. He really struggles with that, and you see why Georgia let him go, and he was never the starter there. He can definitely run around a little bit, and you saw that versus Georgia. That really honestly kept them in the game. So, again, be a run-heavy offense like you usually are, and run the quarterback a little bit more, and hope he doesn't get hurt. And then you could also put in, you have a decent backup. Gavin Wimsatt at Rutgers was decent. So we'll see about him if they have to put him in. Number 14 is my biggest disappointment of the whole year in the SEC is Auburn. This team has way more talent than last year, and I think they're going to finish worse than they did last year. But I will say the schedule is probably a little bit harder, but still, the quarterback position could have been solved. There were plenty of guys in the portal, and for whatever reason, Hugh Freeze just decided, I'm not going to go in the portal and get a quarterback. I don't know whether it's because the NIL hadn't been fully pushed yet by the boosters or because he didn't like any of the quarterbacks. But there's no way you could sit there and tell me you watched Peyton Thorne and said, you know what, I like this guy more than anyone in the portal. Like, I don't love Will Howard. Will Howard be a significant upgrade over Peyton Thorne and a significant upgrade from what I've seen so far out of Hank Brown. You're going to have to get a quarterback for next year, guys, because you have weapons. You have very good wide receivers. You have a really good running back in Jarquez Hunter. Offensive line is good enough. Defense isn't great, but if you had a quarterback with this team, I think they're an 8 or 9-win team. So bad job by Hugh Freeze on that. And he continues to throw guys under the bus too in the post-game press conference. So I don't really like that. It's going to be very interesting. This could go down very quickly. They play Oklahoma this week. Honestly, this is kind of a loser goes home type of game for me. I think whoever loses this game between Auburn and Oklahoma is going to have a very rough year and finish in the bottom 4 or 5 of the SEC. So it's going to be interesting down there at Jordan-Hare. If Auburn doesn't pull out a win, or if it gets ugly for one of those teams, it could get ugly the rest of the season for both or one of those teams. Number 15, and this is where there's no debate. These are the 2 worst teams in the SEC, in my opinion. They played this week. Number 15 is Florida. I just think they've completely quit. They don't know what they're doing. When I heard before the game DJ Lagawy is going to get the 3rd, 9th, and 12th possession of the game, or 3rd, 6th, and 9th, whatever it was, when you're already planning out when your backup quarterback's taking reps and you're not feeling the flow of the game, you have no idea what you're doing as a coach. You just don't. You don't plan that stuff out. You let the flow dictate what you do in that game. If you have a set, obviously everyone has a script, but if your script is not going well, what is the need to stick to it? For example, Graham Mertz played well in this game. I think he only had 2 incompletions. He was playing well. There was no reason to put DJ Lagawy in from what I saw. So didn't really understand that. I think they're just caught in, they don't have an identity. They don't really know what they're doing as a coaching staff. Billy Napier will be fired at some point. I'm surprised he hasn't been fired already during the bye week. But it's just bad down there in Gainesville. It's going to be interesting what they do the rest of the year, but this is not a good football team. Number 16 is Mississippi State. We talked about this again on the video that I made last night. Mississippi State is old Vanderbilt bad. They're just completely terrible. I don't remember the last time even like Georgia or Alabama was favored this much over Vanderbilt, like Texas is over Mississippi State. 38 points at home versus another SEC team is ridiculous. I thought Jeff Lebby was a bad hire. I'm not going to judge him off this year because that'd be unfair. I don't think many guys would do very well with that roster. It's one of the worst I've ever seen of an SEC team, and I said that going into the year. I had them winning 2 or 3 games. I don't know if they'll even get to that. At best, they're a 2-win football team, in my opinion, because they have UMass on the schedule. But they could lose that game. They really could. They're really bad. They got boat raced at home by Toledo, so I wouldn't put anything past this team. They're my 16th team, and honestly, you saw this weekend, there's a pretty big chasm between the 15th and 16th team in the country or in the SEC. So that is my SEC power rankings after week 4. We will do this every week, guys. I really appreciate you guys being here. Again, please hit that like button. Please subscribe down below. We are here every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern time with my boy Tyler, breaking down last week's games and previewing this week's games, talking about everything else in between. So please hit that like button. Please subscribe down below. Also, go check out the Texas channel and subscribe there if you like Texas content. That's more of your flavor. Obviously, I'm a Texas fan. I cover them every Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern time. I really appreciate you guys being here. Hook 'em and go SEC. Thank you, guys.